Change the following percentage into decimal. So again, we're converting a percentage into a decimal number. Now we have been doing questions like this, but the only difference was that we were converting decimals into percentages. But now we're doing the opposite, which means the whole process that we have been doing for converting decimals into percentages is now going to reverse. So let's see how it's done. So we've discussed that converting a percentage into a decimal is basically the opposite of converting a decimal into a percentage. I'll just use the percent sign. And let's revise what we did to convert a decimal into a percentage. So converting a decimal into a percentage meant that we had to get rid of the decimal. And for that we multiplied it by numbers like 10 or 100 or 1000 or any number made up of 1 and a couple of zeros. And what happened was that the decimal point moved towards the right, and depending on the number that the decimal number was being multiplied with and the number of zeros in that specific number, the decimal point moved as many spaces towards the right as the number of zeros. Now keeping this in mind, and keeping in mind the fact that converting a percentage into a decimal is exactly the opposite of this process, it's safe to say that since we were multiplying when we were converting a decimal into a percentage, to do the opposite we will be dividing. And if the decimal point was moving towards the right when it was being multiplied, the decimal point is going to move towards the left now that we are doing the opposite. What remains the same though is the number of spaces that the decimal point is going to move. So if we divide it by 100, the decimal point is going to move 2 places, but it's now going to move in the left direction. So let's see how we can solve this specific question. So the first step is to write down the percentage as a fraction. So 160 is exactly the same as 160%. So we can write it down in any way we want. It doesn't really make any difference at all. And this is our first step. We just need to write down this percentage as a fraction. The second step is where we are going to do all the math. So we just discussed that the decimal point is going to move towards the left, and the number of spaces depend on the number of zeros in the number we're dividing it with. So there are 2 zeros in 100, and the decimal right now is here. So let me just add this. So 160.0 and 100.0, it's exactly the same as 160 over 100. Adding a point and a 0 at the end following the decimal point does not make any difference at all. It is just for our own convenience. So it is going to make a lot more sense to you now when I explain it. So 160.0, and we need to bring the decimal point somewhere in between these numbers. So the decimal moves moves towards the left and there are two zeros, so the decimal moves two places towards the left, so it's going to end up in between 1 and 6, and what we get as a result is 1.60. So 160% when converted into a decimal is 1.60. Simple, right?